containing our wishes for the future we have yet to see, but unapologetically believe can be if it has the opportunity to breathe. Each one signed, unique in its design, but similarly inked with the blood of our ancestors who died so we could speak our truth by our vote. When this new world arrives, see, this is where the hard work begins. We cannot allow those who have contributed to the death of our past be responsible for our future life. Even those we choose to stand in our stead need to be held accountable. They too need to be led. The collective us tells them how to hold our new world, how to feed it, when to let it cry and when to bring it comfort. We must make sure they are present, not only for the first steps, but also for the fall, so that our new world knows that it has the support not of some, but of all. Do you believe this new world is on the way? This world where we stand together, this world where Black lives matter, so Black lives lead, this world where the power lives with the collective us, a world that will see children as children and not problems to be solved, a world that doesn't need police for public safety, a world that offers education and not indoctrination, this world of our ancestors' dreams. Family, I believe, and my ask is today that you believe with me and stand in this conviction so that our future hope will be so much greater than the failures of our past. Peace.
Wow, Sean, thank you so much for setting the tone for us today, brother. We so appreciate those words. We definitely appreciate your work on the ground as well. And with that, I want to set the tone a little bit here, excuse me, guys, for where we are with ACLT. Africatown Community Land Trust has been working on the ground to really preserve the culture, the legacy, the brilliance that Black people have really brought to the Central District of Seattle. Through gentrification and displacement, we have seen heavy, heavy numbers leave the area and really leaving startling numbers left behind. What we're doing is we are working to change the scope of what the CD, Central District, and South End actually look like with regard to celebrating and in cultivating our genius in these areas and in these spaces. We are working with development partners to create affordable housing options, such as Liberty Bank Building and the coming Africatown Plaza, as well as other development partners to create affordable home ownership opportunities like the Village Gardens that we partnered with Homestead Community Land Trust on, and an upcoming project, Walker Street, that we are doing ourselves. Really excited to bring some development partners onto that project. It's very new. So with that, we care so much about not just spaces and land and housing, but also how community is built in those spaces. Buildings don't do that. It is the people within it. It is the community within it. It is the relationships that are built in that community that actually build what community looks like and what we all know of and experience as community. So we invite all of the candidates today to think about the lens of land, housing, equitable development, equitable business. What does it really look like to shape a future and hold space for folks who it seems like a lot of this development is not thinking about or caring about? I'm excited to hear from these candidates today. And I do hope that those of you who have questions, if you want to add them to the chat, add them to Facebook. We do have folks monitoring those systems. So hopefully, if there's time permitting, we'll be able to get to those questions. But I'm really excited for this list of questions that we have gotten from community that really represent a large community voice asking and demanding for change. And with that, I'll pass it on over to Isaac Joy from King County Equity Now to talk about the updates there. I'm sorry. I see Latanya is actually on, not Isaac. Sorry, I called the wrong name. Latanya, can you give us a quick 3-minute update on King County Equity Now and where the coalition stands in terms of research and a lot of the work that's already been happening?
All I can do. But yeah, I straight up don't know how to date.
Hello. Yes, I can give a bit of an update.
Well,
so a couple things.
Jen's freaking off. So.
A couple things going on. We got the community research is continuing on. Our research teams have been working on figuring out, talking to community about what creates community public safety as well as health and the things that are needed to thrive. We have a teach-in tomorrow at 3:30 that will talk more about the research and the community process around participatory budgeting. We also have been working with a lot of other groups on a solidarity budget focused on working together to make sure that all communities are working together towards finding funds for all the things that we need, as opposed to allowing the city to have us fighting each other. I see Isaac just popped in, so I will turn it over to him. Isaac, you ready? There he is.
Yes. Apologies, I was having some technical difficulties. Latanya was doing such a great job that I don't know if I should interrupt really. But yes, King County Equity Now, really it's about community. It's about bringing folks together to leverage our collective power to move this region really forward towards equity. I think we kind of underscore the spirit of Sean's poem or Baldwin. I think we underscore the land focus that Triana brought up with Africatown Community Land Trust, as well as a number of other demands or equity solutions that we put forward that we think will move this region towards equity. To Latan's point, we are collectively pioneering Black-led research process, which will dovetail into the Black-led Research Institute. We're all about amplifying the work of folks that are on the ground that have been dedicated to doing this work in the community. And so I think along those lines, for the candidates, we would probably like to ask, what are your plans specifically, and how will you hold and utilize your elected office to advance the Black community in this region towards equity? And tangibly, how do your plans kind of align to get the Black community towards equity in a realistic timeline? So yeah, happy and excited to hear that. And with that, I will pass it off to the next person. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Isaac. Triana, Latanya, we appreciate you. Sean, we appreciate you. My name is Teme Wakoma.
And I'm Latiu Cosmos.
We are your moderators for this evening. We'll be giving you some basic ground rules, very simple since we're virtual. We'll be giving 90 seconds each for each person highlighted on the forum to do their introductions. We'll also be giving you 90 seconds to answer the questions, the prepared questions. We have a timekeeper, Fanico. He will be explaining to you how he'll be keeping time. I think he has like a sound system, like something to listen for. So Nico, we're gonna pass it over to you so you can explain to them what it's gonna look like as you're keeping time, what keeping time looks like.
How's everybody doing this afternoon? Thank you guys for coming. So I'm Fanu Glover Jr. and I'll just be keeping time. So I'm just gonna be playing a little buzzer sound. I'm gonna play it now so you guys can hear it, but I'm gonna call out 30 seconds when the time is up, when you guys are halfway through your marks, and then this will be the sound when your time is up. So I'm gonna start right now. It'll just be like a little door bell ringing, but that would be the sound when the time is up. So I'll pass that back over to Tame and Latio to get it started.
Thank you so much, Nico, for that. So just to reiterate, you have 90 seconds. He'll say 30 seconds when you have 30 seconds left. And then when your time is up, he'll ring that bell and we will mute you, or you can mute yourself. Next, we have Sade with Decrim Seattle, and we're gonna pass it off to you.
Good evening or good late afternoon, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great time. I'm actually working with King County Equity now, and I just want to give a couple of words in regard to the judicial candidacy. Seattle is 6% Black, the county is also 6% Black, and the jail is 40% Black. What we see and what we know is that disparate policing has ravaged our community. We need the candidates to clearly articulate why they're going to be able to protect Black interests and uphold our constitutional rights in the courtroom. While community is well versed in language of liberation and equity and aware of what needs to happen to dismantle oppressive systems, courts are struggling to keep up with the movement, despite the data to support it and despite what we know is honest and true. Court Rule 3.2 presumes that there's release, and we see every day in court that that is not being followed. We're gonna ask questions of our judicial candidates to ensure that they know the court rules, that they know how important equity and justice are to our community and what they are willing to do to ensure that that happens.
And for the first group of candidates that will be asking questions, we would like the people running for King County Superior Court to introduce themselves, and that would be Carolyn Ladd, Andrea Robertson, and Andre Jamon, a representative for Hillary Madsen.
And remember, you guys have 90 seconds each. So whoever begins first, Nico will start the timer.
And I'm ready when you guys are.
If Carolyn Ladd is here, we can start with you. You have 90 seconds to introduce yourself.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you this afternoon. About 25% of the voters in 2016 in King County did not vote for judges. And I think that's because they lack confidence in who to vote for. So I appreciate the opportunity. I'm Carolyn Ladd. I'm running for King County Superior Court Department 30. I am challenging a 20-year incumbent. I'm challenging him because he was sanctioned by the Commission on Judicial Conduct for making a racially biased statement suggesting that someone's race was indicative of their likelihood to be a gangster. That sanction's available online at the Commission on Judicial Conduct. So I'll tell you about myself. I've been a lawyer for 30 years. I've been endorsed by 9 Democratic legislative districts, including the districts that are represented this evening, the 11th, the 37th, and the 43rd. I've been endorsed by Democrats for diversity and inclusion.
30 seconds.
So I'm passionate about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I just finished a 2-year term on the board of Washington Women Lawyers. I am a frequent speaker and author on topics of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and there are articles on my website, carolynladdforjudge.com. I've been rated exceptionally well qualified by Q Law, the LGBTQ Bar Association, by the Veterans Bar Association. Oh, and I think I hear the bell. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn.
Thank you, Caroline, for your introduction.
Appreciate that.
And next candidate is Andrea Robertson. If you please introduce yourself.
Sure, thank you. Thanks so much for having me tonight. I hope that some of the discussion tonight is going to be about pretrial detention in criminal cases. That's something I've had experience with over the last 22 years as a criminal defense attorney. I also hope there's some discussion regarding selecting jurors for jury trial in race-based peremptory challenges. Because again, after 22 years of fighting for fair justice for my clients, I'm familiar with challenging those strikes and I've raised those myself. I also hope there's some discussion regarding challenging police misconduct, the destruction of evidence, racial profiling, stop and frisk, and use of force. These disproportionately impact communities of color, and I've had 22 years, again, experience challenging stops, detentions, and police conduct. These are only some of the issues that judges address every day in our courts. These are the issues where judges can have meaningful impact on our communities. I've received the endorsement of the Democrats for Diversity and Inclusion. I've been rated by all 8 of the Minority Bar Association judicial evaluation committees. I've received higher ratings than my opponent in every single one of these interviews, and I've received 5 ratings of exceptionally well qualified from these different organizations. I very much look forward to this conversation tonight. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you. We appreciate your introduction. We are going to move forward with Andrea Jarmon, which is a representative for Hillary Madison.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Andrea Jarman, an attorney, community volunteer, motivational speaker. Hillary Madsen couldn't join us tonight because her sister is getting married, but it was really important that she have a presence here to share with you her campaign platform. I met Hillary while I was serving on the Board of Governors. She was doing a presentation about the challenges youth face in our juvenile justice system. She was speaking with passion about the critical need for counsel for both criminal and dependency proceedings, the urgent need for legal funding, smart, unequivocal, confident. She was impressive, both authentically and balanced. She is dedicated to addressing the issues that are pertinent to our communities right now that we are facing: police misconduct, disparities, injustices in our systems, both civil and criminal. She's brought a significant amount of passion to this campaign, and it shows in her endorsements. She has been endorsed by over 85 judges, 50 elected officials, 22 Democratic organizations, 7 labor unions,
30 seconds.
and The Stranger. We need a judicial candidate that is going to be open and honest and truly committed to these issues. And that's who Hillary Madsen is. And that's why I'm here, glad to support her.
Thank you for introducing her. And so the first question that we're going to tackle for each of these candidates, and we'll go in the same order that we had you introduce yourselves. And so we'll start with Carolyn Ladd. And so our first question is, what are the primary differences between you and your opponents as it relates to policy, and what have you done or will do if elected?
First, I would like to point out the voter guide to people. I hope that they read that. And let me say, my opponent is not on this evening. I'm in a different race than Andrea and Hillary. They're running for 13, so I put a 30 by my name so you can see. So my opponent is not on this evening. But I hope that you'll read the voter statement, read his, read mine. He is, for example, endorsed by elected Republicans. I have a broad range of people who are endorsing me in the voter guide, including great civil rights champions like former King County Councilman Larry Gossett and Lem Howell, who is a PCO with the 37th, and Ron Ward, who is the first African-American president of the Washington State Bar Association. Also, in the case that I mentioned earlier, where my opponent was sanctioned, was a murder case that went up to the Washington Supreme Court and was decided earlier this year. It's called State versus Carl Pierce. Thank you. And in that case, my opponent also allowed the state to use a peremptory challenge to dismiss the only potential African-American juror in the pool. And so I'm running to bring a new and more inclusive voice to the court. I think we're going to talk about jury diversity more later, but that is certainly a passion of mine, that juries represent a fair cross-section of the community. And I'm proud of the community's support that I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Andrea Robertson, would you like to answer the question, please?
She does not have the depth of experience or knowledge of the issues to address what I've mentioned before, and a tiny fraction of the amount of time I've spent in court. I've literally been in court most days of the week for over 22 years. This is why all of the minority bar associations who have rated judicial candidates
30 seconds.
have found me more qualified to tackle some of the policy issues. I will concede that a lot of some of the issues that my opponent stands for may be things that I may stand behind as well. However, she's running a political campaign that's not based on the depth of knowledge and experience that's necessary to be a judicial candidate. In contrast, I'm running a judicial campaign based on my experience, based on my knowledge, based on the wisdom I've accumulated over 22 years, and I'm looking forward to using that to serve as a judge.
Thank you so much for the answer. We are going to go ahead to Ms. Jarman to answer for Hillary.
Thank you. Uh-oh. Am I unmuted? Okay. The realities facing our criminal justice system are of such significant magnitude. It doesn't take anyone beyond 3 months to immediately recognize what the challenges are facing our justice system. Immediately, those issues became apparent to Hillary Madsen. Her career stands out because she doesn't talk about injustice only, she's actually done work. Her career has not been about profits. It's been dedicated representing children and youth in our system, people who have been incarcerated, people who have been marginalized, and immigrant communities and families. Her pro bono work is not charity. It also should never be mischaracterized as not experience. That is work in the trenches. She volunteers with clinics to help give people legal aid to individuals most in need, women who are pregnant, women who are at risk of involvement with the child welfare system. That is a missed opportunity to see the connection between that system and our criminal justice system. And she also volunteers with prison programs. So her career has been about doing the work.
Thank you. Thank you. We're going to move on to our next question. Bail practices and pretrial incarceration have been identified as a means of coercing pleas and disparately impacting Black people. What are your thoughts on this and how will you address this? We will ask, do you want to go in the same order?
Sure.
Okay. We'll start with you, Ms. Ladd.
Child custody. And so I'm concerned about cash bail criminalizing poverty. Pre-trial, people are presumed innocent. They are innocent until proven guilty under our Constitution. And so people who are in jail pre-trial who can't get out only because they don't have the money, really that's criminalizing poverty. I've been fortunate to serve as a pro tem or a temporary judge at the Seattle Municipal Court. They have been very innovative in a number of programs that they have. They have found that there are better ways and equally or more effective ways of getting people to return for court dates. Things as simple as sending text message reminders to people of when their court dates are, so that people will come. The municipal court also has a good program to match people with services right there in the court. So to match people with social workers, housing, other services that they might need in order to meet the person where they are, to try to help the person. And I think that those methods are equally effective, as if not more than cash bail, and they're certainly more equitable.
Right on the money with the timing. You guys are doing great. We are gonna move on to Ms. Andrea Robertson.
Okay. All right. I think it's really important for the judges who are hearing bail arguments to reread Criminal Rule 3.2. I see that we have among us here tonight, Ms. Smith. I know she and I have both endeavored to teach judges that 3.2 is important to revisit on occasion because it stands for the proposition that the presumption is for release. And it is only in an instance when a judge can make a conclusion with evidence and facts to back that up, that the person is likely to commit a violent offense if released, or is unlikely to show up for court. And in that instance, there are still other alternatives that are embedded in the rule to allow judges to exercise discretion to impose different ways to make sure that this person continues to show up. I think some judges get wrapped up in the story of what the person is accused of. And if it's a serious charge, then they set a dollar amount commiserate with whatever the accusation is, without the presumption that the person is innocent of the crime for which they're accused. I've seen firsthand folks making difficult decisions, sometimes the wrong decisions, because they simply did not have the money to bail out, or they were able to bail out, but they exhausted all their resources and were unable to afford counsel, unable to afford expert services. It's a terrible system to ensure that someone continues to come to court when there are alternatives that work equally well or better. I would be in favor of utilizing those alternatives, and for the most part, reading 3.1 very carefully in each individual case and making a fact-based conclusion on whether that person is realistically a threat to public safety or whether they are a flight risk.
Thank you. And last but not least, we'd like to hear from Ms. Jarman from Madison's perspective. Thank you.
Hillary understands that incarceration and pretrial release impacts housing, employment, relationships, and family. I don't believe that we need to reread the rule. Judges are literate. They know what the rule is. The issue is that the rule is unequally and inequitably applied. Hillary conducted a statewide survey and helped educate lawyers on the use of cash bail in juvenile courts. It's necessary to end cash bail. She's taken this strong stance. There are two popular alternatives to cash bail: risk assessments, electronic monitoring. But even these are tied to they're tied and implicated in racial disproportionality. The efforts of community bail funds across America have really shown that most people will come to court. They will return to court if they're given a reasonable opportunity to do so. So one of the things that Hillary wants to look at is really focusing on reevaluating how bail is determined based upon who is before the court, eliminating the need of defendants to personally appear, and expanding pretrial release services. There's a lot of work that can be done, and Hillary's prepared to do that work and speak boldly about the implications of racial disparities along that issues.
Thank you for your answer. And the next question, and we would like to go in reverse order, starting with Andrea Jarman. So as a judge, how can you ensure the integrity of justice when a prosecutor presents tainted or falsified evidence in your court? What action can you pursue against them?
Oh, it's on. Okay, there we go. Okay. I think my video once operating is on. Well, in civil, family law, and dependency courts, Hillary has actually sought sanctions against other attorneys, including sanctions against his deputy attorney generals for ignoring court orders and breaking local court rules. In criminal courts, judges have the same power to sanction prosecutors. This power, though, is rarely used. The double standards that arise in courtrooms is something that Hillary Madsen, she recognizes. Beyond sanctions, judges can also report prosecutorial misconduct to supervisors, to the State Bar Association, and if evidence is tainted, judges also have an obligation to dismiss the case. So we know the measures. The question and the issue is having a judge who's on the bench courageous enough to exercise the measures to ensure equity and fairness.
Okay, Ms. Robertson, can you please answer that question for us? You want to repeat the question?
Sure. As a judge, how can you ensure the integrity of justice when a prosecutor presents tainted evidence or falsified evidence in your court? What action can you pursue against them?
There are a number of different areas in which this comes into play. One of the first ways in which a judge sees this happen is through a request for a search warrant that is issued by a law enforcement officer. And there are, thankfully, some recent cases to allow for judges to have a closer look at whether or not the search warrant is based on broad sweeping generalizations. The Breonna Taylor case is a rather horrifying example of a judge who rubber stamped a search warrant that was based on generalizations regarding those drug dealers without fact-based decisions. The judge made the approval of the search warrant and effectively allowed the events of that evening to transpire. So judges, first and foremost, need to not rubber stamp assertions by prosecutors and police officers unless there's actual facts to back that up. As far as behavior in court and false statements made by police officers and prosecutors, that's under Court Rule 8.3. I've brought many of those challenges. There are different ways in which judges can effectuate some sanction, and the most serious of those is a dismissal of the case. There's also a lesser version, which results in a suppression of evidence. I'm not at all afraid to exercise either one of those, as I've brought many of those challenges over the years. And the judges who I love and admire the most are the ones who are unafraid to do the bold, courageous thing. And I am definitely cut from the same cloth. So I plan to utilize 8.3 whenever needed to address false statements made in my courtroom.
Thank you for your answer. Carolyn Ladd, please answer.
I think that falsified evidence undermines the judicial system. We cannot have that in our court system. We just can't. And I would agree with the two Andreas who preceded me that as a judge, you do have remedies available. You could report a prosecutor to the district attorney for misconduct. You could report the lawyer to the Washington State Bar Association for investigation if they have, and they would have violated the rules if they provided falsified evidence. And there are sanctions available, including dismissal of the charges being the most serious of those sanctions. So a judge does have tools at her discretion to handle such matters, and they're serious and they need to be dealt with in a serious way.
Thank you all for answering that question. And we have a follow-up in regards to that question. So we have heard about reporting attorneys who have falsified or presented tainted evidence. But beyond reporting, what action can be taken to hold those that have once falsified or have repeatedly presented evidence that's not usable in court? What further action can be pursued against them?
Well, I think that reporting them to the Washington State Bar Association is an important tool and sanction, because the Washington State Bar Association is the organization that holds your license to practice as an attorney. So I think that that is an important step, an important body that functions to govern lawyers. I think it's very unusual for a judge to report someone to the Washington State Bar Association. And maybe that should happen more frequently. I think it should if misconduct is occurring in the courtroom. So I would say that that is an important and underutilized opportunity for judges when they see misconduct, serious misconduct like this in the courtroom.
Thank you. And I guess the follow-up question is for all candidates. If you please answer that question. Again, beyond reporting to the Washington Bar Association, what action can be taken for prosecutors who have presented evidence that has locked up people and damaged and harmed families repeatedly? What action can be taken against those individuals who have shown pattern?
And Ms. Robertson, Ms. Robertson, we're going to actually give you the floor. And just to piggyback on Latio, I think the question is, what will you do? We've been able to hear the steps and actions that can be taken. I think what we're really wanting to know is, what are your intentions, and what is your behavior practices around that? Is that something you're willing to, take to the limit, in regards to people who are losing livelihoods because of, trumped up charges, falsified information? So I think we know you can, we've heard what you guys have said and we appreciate that, but we really want to know your unique experience, and what you intend to do in your unique experience. So Ms. Robertson, I'm going to give the floor over to you.
Certainly. I know among the challenges that I've brought of prosecutor behavior was one that's deemed vindictive prosecution. In other words, I had won a portion of the case and the prosecutor vindictively added additional charges. So that, among false statements that have been raised in court and other types of challenges that have been raised over the years, have always resulted in a challenge from the defense perspective as to whether the case should be dismissed, whether evidence should be suppressed, and as far as any actions that could be taken against the prosecutor, the judge has the authority to basically sanction them by losing the case or the evidence, or they can report them to the Bar Association, or they can hold them in contempt of court. A judge who I was admiring in terms of how she addressed this problem up in Snohomish County recently, took great pains to write an exhaustive opinion. This is a Superior Court judge for a prosecutor up in Snohomish County who hid evidence from the defense until the middle of the trial. This is something that happens on occasion, and it's akin to lying in court because it basically means that they failed to meet their requirements under discovery to try to surprise the defense attorney and cause a tactical advantage at the time of trial. This judge took take great pains to go straight to the core of what this prosecutor engaged in and effectively brought that to the attention of the public at large. I believe the opinion was over 30 pages long. So I am not at all afraid to call out that behavior to the greatest degree that I can. In terms of any actions that could be taken by the Bar Association, obviously a trial court judge would not have any impact on that. And any criminal actions that could be brought against a prosecutor would be the responsibility of a prosecuting authority to pursue. But among the tools that a judge possesses, I'm not afraid to use the ones at my disposal. Thank you.
Thank you for your time.
And lastly, we're going to have Ms. Drummond respond.
Thank you. And I think you've kind of heard some of the measures that can be taken, first being responsive to those motions for sanctions, those motions to suppress, being responsive to motions to dismiss the case, exercising courageous autonomy to make referrals to the appropriate associations that can hold the attorneys accountable for their actions. I think that we are now in a space where we are willing to engage more critically along these issues. We have a call from our Washington State Supreme Court to actually engage in these conversations and dialogues. I think part of it is also freeing judges up to engage more openly in trainings and dialogues about how the system works. The system works in some ways to minimize the attention that these sort of issues get. I think the other critical thing is that when at least in the context of evaluating evidence,
30 seconds.
Judges also play a role in terms of looking at the credibility of the documents that are before them, like the PC cert, or in a bench trial, they're weighing the credibility of the witnesses who are presenting. So again, being able to be courageous and make those determinations when you see those issues before the court, and follow up on the appropriate measures that you have the power to take.
Thank you all for answering that question. I think it's very important that we all, as community, understand the impact that such practices can have on families and people. And so, thank you all for telling us your perspective and actions that you're willing to do and willing to take in order to address such harmful practices within the justice system. I'll hit the next one.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I believe this is our last question for prepared questions, and we'll check in after to see if there are any questions from our audience that are tuning in virtually. So the last question is, what youth organizations are you affiliated with? We will start with Ms. Ladd.
I am a volunteer for the Partnership for Youth Justice. I serve on the Renton Accountability Board. It is a diversion program of the King County Superior Court. Young people who have been charged with their first or second offense come to the program. They come with a responsible adult. They write an essay about what happened and who was harmed. They come to the board. They're interviewed with their responsible adult. They're interviewed separately. The board discusses and comes up with a remedy. That could be volunteering. It could be counseling. It could be restoration. It could be an apology letter. The idea is that the young person, that this is a restorative justice program and that the young person learns from the experience. And if they complete the program, they do not get a criminal record. And I think that's so important for young people.
30 seconds.
Get a criminal record because we know from studies that young people, their brains aren't fully developed. They are prone to impulsive actions. They don't have as good of judgment as adults, and they have a greater capacity for growth and self-improvement. And so I think it's really important to give juveniles an alternative so that they don't have a conviction that limits employment and education opportunities going forward.
Thank you for your answer. And Andrea Robertson, if you please answer the question.
Thank you. I had the good fortune while in law school of working with the street law program that allowed me to teach in Seattle Public Schools. My school that I landed at was Rainier Beach High School, and I appreciated the opportunity so much that I continued to volunteer for 3 years after that, working with the Nathan Hale High School, volunteering and teaching not only in legal issues, but primarily speech and debate competition. And I actually was honored with an award for advancing high school debate in the Seattle Public Schools. It's called the Becky Galantine Award. After my service in completing that. I also continued to volunteer in teaching with mock trial programs. There's a competition each year at the King County Superior Court where local students will participate. And as we know from the American Bar Association as recently as last year, 85% of lawyers across the US are white. And that's a travesty. Kids need to know that this path is available to them, and there needs to be a greater diversity of folks entering the legal profession in order to have representation of different types of people. So programs like the mock trial competition allow this window into this life that kids can realize that they certainly can be part of the legal profession, and I intend to continue to keep working in that regard. Beyond that, I also teach at the UW Law School. I wouldn't say that those are youth. They're much younger than myself for the most part. But the remainder of my youth organizations are attached to my kids and their pursuits. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, Ms. Jarman, we're going to give you an opportunity to answer this question. And we actually have one more question for you all after this question. So go ahead, Ms. Jarman, take the floor away.
Ms. Madsen is involved in juvenile justice every single day. That's what she does. That's her work. That's her life. That's her passion. She is also on the board of the Children's Alliance. She works closely with the Mockingbird Society. In recent years, she's been involved with engaging youth from the Creative Justice Incredible Messengers on education and lobbying efforts. So this is her passion. This is something that she does on a daily basis in addition to her daily work and her volunteer experience in life.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you all. And the last question is, are you all willing to take retroactive action to revisit cases that have either shown evidence of constitutional violations of people and or people that were charged when they were younger, since science has shown that brain development is not fully complete until mid-20s, and there are people that have been charged when they were still in that young age. Are you willing to revisit those cases and make sure that justice is served?
And we'll start with Carolyn.
Yes. Yes, I would be willing to look at that, particularly cases, the first part of your question. Can you ask me the first part again? I think it's really, I'll just say, I think it's really important that the justice system be willing to look at convictions. I think, did you say when additional evidence becomes available or it becomes clear that there's something wrong with the conviction, should the court system be looking at those? Absolutely, yes. You know, it should be the justice system, right? And if someone was wrongfully convicted, or there's enough evidence that there's a concern that someone was wrongfully convicted, the court system needs to look at that. Absolutely. And we've seen people, right, who've been exonerated later, and there has to be an outlet for that. So yes.
Thank you.
Okay, we will now give opportunity to Ms. Robertson to answer that question.
Certainly, yes, absolutely. I've been a proud supporter of the Innocence Project for years now, and I've kept in close contact with Professor Jackie McMurtry, who heads up the program through the UW Law School for local petitions for review for folks who have been falsely convicted. So that is a huge problem. And one of the many things that judges get to do in holding a trial is to make sure that the trial is held fairly. The person has proper representation. The science that comes in to convict them is proper science. I've spent years challenging forensic science, and so I'm very well familiar with that. The other issue that you mentioned in your question was in regards to revisiting juvenile defendants. And thankfully, a recent case has opened this wide open to allow for the resentencing of juveniles, with the recognition that the science regarding brain development has made it abundantly clear that children are different, and their capacity to make good decisions in the moment and their capacity to be able to control their impulses is simply not the same as with an adult. So it opens up the ability to have resentencing for cases for sometimes kids that are still in prison years and years later, but those factors, which are called the Miller factors, were never taken into account at the time of sentencing because the science and the law had not quite caught up to it. So revisiting long sentences that were imposed under the mandatory sentencing guidelines without considering those juvenile factors, that's now been overturned and it's now allowed. And I'm very much looking forward to exercising discretion in cases like that.
Thank you. And Ms. Jarman, if you'll answer the question, please. Thank you.
Well, the question for Hillary Madsen would be absolutely yes. She saw on a firsthand basis the impact of these sentences to juvenile offenders. She saw the impact. So the question of whether or not she would be willing to go back and revisit those cases, absolutely. But also freshly looking at the cases that come before her, she would be mindful of those parameters even from the initial point of sentencing. So there's no long-winded answer to give you to that. The answer is absolutely yes. That's what she's been dedicated to working on.
Thank you all for answering those questions. And since we currently do not have audience questions, we would like to transition on to our next set of candidates for questioning. Thank you all. We appreciate you.
We appreciate your time and your efforts to educate our audience on the important issues that we've discussed tonight.
Sorry, one moment. I think we're receiving some questions actually.
I can see Sade's question. Would you like me to start? I can see her question.
Yes, absolutely, Carolyn. Okay. You can start. Actually, before you start, do the other candidates see that question? because I don't want, okay, great. I want it to make sense. And if you could do us a favor while we're working on this side, can you just say the question out loud before you answer? We'll give you an extra surplus of time. Thank you so much, Carolyn.
Shade Smith writes, jury selection needs to be discussed. How to ensure representation on juries? We make better decisions for everyone. The University of Washington did a study about King County juries and found that 64% of them did not have a Black person and that they were underrepresented for other people of color as well. Studies have shown that diverse juries make better decisions. They spend more time deliberating, they consider more viewpoints, and just ultimately make a better decision. The law requires that a jury is supposed to be a fair cross-section of the community. So I think one thing we can do to ensure better representation in juries is to increase the pay for jurors. So King County pays jurors $10 a day. That amount was set in 1959. And most people cannot afford to do jury service unless their employer pays them to do jury service. $10 is just not enough. A case went to the Washington Supreme Court about whether or not jurors should be paid minimum wage, and the court recognized that there's underrepresentation in jury service, but I think left it to the legislature to come up with a financial solution for that. So we need to pay jurors more. The other thing as a judge is there's a new General Rule 37, which allows a judge to deny preemptory challenges in jury selection if race could be a factor in why that preemptory challenge is being exercised. Some of you maybe listened to the In the Dark podcast about Curtis Flowers, a man who was tried for the same murder 6 or 7 times. And in that case, oh, I heard the bell. But it's really important that a judge not allow the state to use preemptory challenges to eliminate African Americans from jury service.
Okay, we will go to Ms. Robertson. Can you please answer the question?
Certainly, thank you. Ms. Ladd began discussing some of the same topics, but I wanted to do a slightly deeper dive. Before you even get to the state where you're looking at the retention of the jurors who come into the room, which effectively in some cases becomes a financial question or a logistics question, there's also the summons to get a diverse jury pool to begin with. And so that needs to be addressed, making sure that the jurors who receive summons in the first place pull a large diverse pool from King County. There is a task force that is addressing this among the King County Superior Court Bar, and I'm looking forward to working on that task force because I think that's an important first step. The second aspect is retaining them so that they get to the point where they're eligible to be seated. And this is where the financial aspect is a huge consideration. And interestingly, since COVID and a lot of voir dire has to be conducted by video, there has been a greater diversity in some of the pools that are drawn. And some of the judges have been just shocked to see this. But in some ways, if you consider it, it actually makes it a little more accessible for folks to go through that first stage of the jury selection. So it's worth considering and exploring more as to whether that would increase diversity as well. And then the third area is seating the jury in the box. And that goes to the heart of the peremptory challenges. I'm familiar with the UW study. There's also a study by Duke University that all white juries convict Black defendants 16% more often than white defendants. And just having one person on that jury who is a Black person, that gap was nearly eliminated. So the GR 37 rule, its amendment, and as well as the recent Jefferson case, allows for a stronger challenge to peremptory strikes that are race-based. And I am definitely not afraid of exercising my discretion in denying those challenges. I brought them myself as a defense attorney. And I think I heard the bell. I apologize. Thank you.
Thank you for your answer. And Ms. Jarman, if you'll answer the question, thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Madsen would agree with actually all of the points that have been made. The paltry pay for people serving on jury, it discriminates in very particular ways, low-income residents, especially people of color. And that's why the King County Office of Public Defense filed that lawsuit. Now, while that lawsuit wasn't successful and it was rejected, nonetheless, the Minority and Justice Commission, equally committed to these issues, has identified some concrete reforms along these lines. COVID has sort of given us an opportunity to reevaluate more creative ways of communicating with people, and people move. US mail may not be the very best way to communicate and to bring in that call for diverse communities. And so Madsen wants to explore different communication modes, texting people, emails, social media, because to the extent that we really want to pull in a diverse pool, then we should have a diverse means by which we're actually reaching out to the community. GR37, again, that's a great tool available, but it also contemplates and presumes that there's going to be a judge on the bench who's willing to actually exercise it courageously.
Thank you all for answering the questions. And once again, we want to appreciate all the candidates showing up today and answering all the questions that we have and informing the community on the platforms on which they're running and how they're going to specifically benefit the Black community in how the justice system has harmed and continues to harm. And we are looking to hold each candidate that gets into their position accountable for all the commitments that they have made and shown us in the forum today. And so once again, we want to thank you all for showing today.
Okay, we also want to give you guys closing statements. We're going to give you guys 2 minutes each. So we'll start with Ms. Jarman representing Hillary.
Thank you. I have had the opportunity, like I hope most of my family, friends, and colleagues and community members in King County will do, to read and review all the campaign materials. I absolutely agree with the assertion by the other candidate, Ms. Robinson, that judicial races are not and should not be political. Ms. Madsen believes that too. And yet, in that very assertion lies all of the reasons for which the other candidate should never be the one that represents me. Let me explain. All of the issues that Madsen had spoken to in their campaign, improving our criminal justice system, looking at disproportionality, looking at jury selection, looking at racial bias, looking at access to justice, supporting and promoting diverse judiciary, looking at our criminal system and our civil and dependency system, and evaluating how those things have been impacted by a historical pattern of race and social bias. Looking at all of those issues and ensuring fairness, those are not political issues. Those are judicial issues. They continue to be judicial issues no matter what form or audience the person is speaking to. By choosing to not directly engage in these issues consistently, no matter who the platform is before or no matter who the audience is, characterizing those issues, the issues of marginalized communities, as political, even as one purports a history of such, well, that is political. The issues that are facing this community in our time right now, they are tough, challenging, and pressing issues of our moment. And at the backdrop are the instances like Floyd and Breonna Taylor. Those are the heart and pulse of the circumstances and challenges before us. And we need a candidate that is both experienced and courageous and willing to do the hard work. That's Hillary Madsen. That's the candidate that the people deserve. That's why I'm supporting her. And that's why I'm asking for each of you to support her. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We will move on to Ms. Robinson for closing statements. 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. It's pretty outrageous to be accused of me finding the issues that I challenge day in, day out for the last 22 years and speaking about them freely in these forums to be somehow a lack of courage. That's literally what I've founded my entire career on. So I am more than comfortable talking about these issues because this is what I deal with day in, day out in the court system. The comments that I've made regarding the political aspects of this campaign are due to the fact that my opponent consistently points to a long list of politicians who support her efforts to become a judge, when in reality, the more important opinions should be those who work within the system themselves. And the exhaustive process of going through judicial evaluations is a rather telling point in this campaign. I have received higher ratings from the Latina Bar Association, the Joint Asian Bar Association, the Washington Women Lawyers, Q Law, the Veterans Bar, and King County Bar Association. I have received higher ratings in every single one of those, and 5 of them have given me their highest rating, which is exceptionally well qualified to fill this role. This is not platitudes. This is an exhaustive questionnaire, writing samples, about 40 different references, and a long interview before these folks make this conclusion. And these are folks from all walks of practice: civil, criminal, family law, corporate, in-house counsel. They make their determination independently after lots of volunteer hours. So you don't have to take my word for it. Those who work in the system and have the concerns that you have rated me more qualified for this position. Also, the Progressive Voters Guide has found that I am the proper candidate to vote for in this election as far as my experience level and my capacity for this job. So I'd respectfully request that you consider voting for me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We will wrap up with Ms. Carolyn for closing statements, 2 minutes.
3 of the 4 Superior Court candidates appeared before you tonight. The 4th who did not appear is my opponent. He was sanctioned by the Commission on Judicial Conduct for saying that there was a connection between someone's race and the likelihood that someone was a gangster. This occurred from the bench during a murder trial. A Pew Research poll in June showed that 87% of Black people feel that the criminal justice system is unfair to them, and 61% of white people agreed. If you like the current justice system that we have, if you think it's fair, particularly to communities of color, then you should vote for my opponent because he's been a part of that system for 20 years. But if you want change, if you care about women and women's rights, if you care about Black Lives Matter, if you care about the rule of law, that the law applies equally to everyone, then I'm your candidate. And I hope that you'll check out my website, carolynladdforjudge.com. I heard the district attorney say that there is a backlog of 6,000 felony cases due to COVID-19. And the question that I think King County voters have to ask themselves is, who do they want to hear those cases? So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you all tonight. I very much appreciate it.
Again, we want to thank you all, the judges who came to our forum today to inform us on your important standpoints, who you are, and your platforms. We are now moving on to the next section of our forum. This section will be focusing on District 43. We have Toto Jackson, who will be reading a statement, and then we'll get into the candidate introductions. Toto, the floor is yours.
Hi guys, it's Toto. I'm a KC researcher. I'm also a small business owner in the 37th district, the Central District, exclusive boutique. And I would love to read a statement from my mentor and one of the longest standing Black businesses in Seattle, Washington, D. Charlene Williams. And so here we go. The 43rd district was a red line area in Seattle, along with the 37th district, the only areas that Blacks could buy property when redlining was legal. Then in the mid 1970s, the city of Seattle purposely stopped maintaining the central area and began directing drug traffic and prostitution to the area. The 30-year city plan had been developed, and in order to move forward, they needed to buy up the property that was owned by Black businesses, owners, and families. To accomplish this feat, the city began working with developers to target Black business owners, buying up their properties for pennies on the dollar. For those that would not sell their properties, like my mom, D. Charlene Williams, the city began harassing and targeting them by breaking into their businesses, driving cars through their buildings, or pretending to be doing the work in the area that made it difficult for customers to support their businesses. And lastly, the city drove crime to the area, which made it difficult for business owners to get loans and drove businesses away from the small business owners. What once was a thriving Black business community was ruined by the city, and very few Black business owners were paid what their property was truly worth upon sale. This is how we take away the economic growth and generational wealth of Black people. Currently, there are 2 Black business owners left, and few still own their property, but are no longer operating their businesses within the community. And I really want you guys to understand this, because this statement was from Rita, the daughter of D. Charlene. And it's a great statement for us to really think about and understand when we talk about how we're going to move forward with the future, because we have to address our past.
Thank you so much, Toto. We are now going into the introductions of our candidates for District 43. The same rules apply. You have 90 seconds to introduce yourself. Fanico will give you a 30-second warning, and the bell will be your wrap up. So we will start with Frank Chop with introductions.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk with you tonight. I really appreciate it. Running for another term in office was very important to me. I was responding to a lot of folks who were urging me to run another term in order to work on a number of issues, primarily the following. Childcare needs an enormous influx of new funding to save the childcare system, since 20% of the child centers in the state have closed. They also wanted me to continue working on our efforts for behavioral health to make sure we get folks off the street and into treatment and into supportive housing. They also wanted me to continue my pioneering work in affordable housing, social housing run by nonprofits from the community. Another issue was workforce education, to build on the success that we had in 2019 when we passed the workforce education investment, which was an idea I came up with and passed. It's $1 billion of new money in order to fund free college and university tuition for all low-income students. That's a great success. It'll enormously affect the whole issue of addressing social inequities and actually help provide an opportunity and a pathway for people to get up and out of poverty. But free college and university tuition for all low-income students, it's an entitlement. And the last issue that he asked me to work on was climate action. There's a whole series of actions that we are proposing in order to address this global crisis and doing things at the state level. We've already passed a number of laws that help in that, including the 100% clean electricity mandate. We also passed in the House, under my leadership, a clean fuel standard and a variety of other things. We need to use money from the state and the public sources to really address the inequities that are going on in terms of environmental pollution and climate change, which disproportionately affect communities of color. So thank you for the opportunity to talk tonight. Look forward to the discussion.
Thank you. And we would like to move on to the next candidate to introduce themselves, Sheree Lascelles. You are on mute. We can't hear you. We can't hear you. Ah.
Is that better? Okay, I wasn't on mute. I was just on the wrong mic. Apologies. Brand new camera today. Hello, thank you for having me. Thank you for the intro. Thank you for holding the space. So in an introduction, we traditionally talk about, our merits and our resume as to why I'm running. But my resume is quite literally that I was asked because there are so many folks that have been working in community to change the outcomes for our Black and Brown community members and criminalized populations that didn't feel like they were getting the ear of our representative or access to the seat of power that can change our circumstances or improve our material conditions. And it became pretty frustrating for a lot of folks, to where I was asked in the work that I was doing and how I was doing it on changing, policy for community, specifically stigmatized and criminalized populations, specifically folks experiencing homelessness, sex workers, and drug users. That was pretty much time for someone that was actually in community and from those demographics to be representing. Sorry?
just
30
saying-
seconds. 30 seconds.
Oh, sorry, there's a delay. Apologies. But it was just really time for someone that had experienced these things on the ground floor and not just put themselves amongst people that have experienced it. Actually pulling for the bottom up. So that's why I'm running.
Thank you. So just to reiterate, Nico is our timekeeper. So you'll hear him say 30 seconds. So please be listening for his voice only when you're answering the questions. Also be listening for the bell. That'll let you know when you're wrapped. I'll let Latio ask the first question.
So our first question is, what are the primary differences between you and your opponent as it relates to policy? And what have you done or will do if elected? We'll start with Frank Chop. Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I really appreciate it. Let me give you 3 examples of what I've done and what I want to continue to working on in the next 2 years to basically address poverty and social injustice. 3 programs. Apple Health for all kids. I came up with the program about 10 years ago. We enacted it. We made it across the board for all kids in the state. So now we have 800,000 young people covered with single payer free health care across the state. A huge percentage of those are students of color, and also it's across the state, so we make sure that every child has health care. About half the students in our state in public schools, in fact, are covered by free Apple health care. The second one is the Housing Trust Fund. I co-initiated that several years ago with Sharon Leaf and Low Income Housing Institute, another program that I started. And that program, plus other programs that I've started, like the Home Security Fund, the Housing Essential Needs Program, have
30 seconds.
up with about $2.5 billion of money for affordable housing. And the last one, which is extremely important and I'm very excited about, is the workforce education investment, which I mentioned earlier. It's serving 120,000 young students, half of whom are students of color, to get free college and university tuition. This is the best in the nation. I'm very proud of it, and we need to expand it to make sure we give an opportunity to everyone in this state.
Thank you so much. We will move on to our next candidate to answer that question.
And the same question, correct? The one that you asked what the difference is between myself and my opponent?
Absolutely.
All righty. I have a couple of things, but first and foremost, I want to be able to answer the question directly. The difference between us is essentially how we are guided, how our perspectives in the world are different based on our experiences, and who we look to for the wisdom in order to make decisions in our lives and our policy as well. It's one thing to have the word I at the beginning of every sentence when it comes to the things that you do in community and for community and in your career. It's another to know that you're not always the first one that you need to be looking to for the wisdom to make decisions in your life. It really honestly comes down to, I don't think that I am an authority on everything. And I don't think that I'm a monolith for my communities. So it really comes down to knowing when it's appropriate to pass the mic and bring people into the room to lead that have already been leading for their communities and on their own needs.
30 seconds.
And how that transfers into actual policy is, example, there are multiple people in this room that have been leaders in the research of the community since before anyone even knew my name. And I wouldn't say that I would know anything more than you in your industry.
Thank you so much. Moving on to the next question. If elected to represent the 43rd District, what will you do to repair the damage that was done to the Black community and support Black business growth? We will have Rep. Chop answer that question first. Thank you.
Sorry, there you go. Yes, I think I follow the leadership of King County Equity now in a number of ways. For example, you proposed a business development fund for the Black community. That is something we should support. I would strongly support. the notion of using federal COVID relief funds, which I think we will get more of from the federal government after the election. Hopefully the right person will be elected there. And the federal funds are much more flexible in terms of how you use them compared to state funds, which has a constitutional prohibition about lending of credit. So using a federal money for a Black Business Development Fund, I think would be appropriate. The second part of that is we need to transfer surplus and underutilized public properties and nonprofit properties to organizations like Africatown. I'm very proud of our involvement with a lot of projects throughout Seattle and King County to transfer public assets to community-based Black-led organizations. So I offer to work with you to help carry that out.
30 seconds.
Sheree Lascelles.
Oh, hi. So yeah, Frank Chop just said that there is a constitutional amendment that prevents us from using state funds to help small businesses. First, we should probably work towards changing the constitutions that we're able to use our general funds in a more productive way for Black and Brown communities and investments in those communities, especially when it comes to ownership of land and the land trust that we've already started, but also proliferating land trusts, so that we have spaces for us to thrive in our businesses and in our homes and stay in our communities and with our communities. Two, we probably should start moving towards a state bank and actually making it easier for a municipal bank, and also repealing anything that prevents us from having rent controls. People are able to stay in their communities a lot longer and therefore build businesses and community power in order to invest and actually expand the footprint that they have. We haven't really done much to do that, but a state bank would make it so we can't use the excuse of not having access to FDIC banking loans or credit union banking loans to acquire property or make investments in yourself and your community to expand your prosperous, path.
30 seconds.
Thank you, Sheree Lascelles, for answering our question. And the next one, Tammy.
Do you support reparations for the Black community, specifically that has caused the 43rd District home for nearly 140 years and endured policies that has systematically disenfranchised our community and social economy? And we'll start with Sheree.
I do, but I also think that there's not a clear definition of what reparations will mean in every context. But I think that it should be up to the Black and Brown communities in the 43rd and beyond to decide what reparations actually looks like. But we can start first and foremost with actually making progressive taxation a reality in this state. And the fact that the 43rd is the most wealthy district in the state and one of the wealthiest areas in the entire United States per capita says a lot about where our priorities lie with being able to push Black and Brown folks out of this community, but not actually ask the wealthiest among us to pay their fair share and invest in our education, invest in our infrastructure, and invest in the social services that a lot of the folks in this district have needed to lean on because of the extreme gentrification and extreme business growth that hasn't been accounted for in the development of our city's health.
Thank you, Sheree Lascelles, and Representative Frank Chop, if you please answer the question. Thank you.
Yes, thank you again for asking another question here. I do support reparations. I think we need to have specific proposals on the table so we can react to them and figure out how to best to move them forward. I also strongly believe and agree with Sheree on a number of items, including taxing the wealthy. We've already started doing that, but we need to do more. One example, I passed the estate tax, which is essentially a tax on wealthy dead people, and dedicated it to the Education Legacy Trust Fund. I did that a few years ago. That tax source from wealthy dead estates basically brought in $400 million of funding this year alone for education programs. Also, the workforce education investment that I passed, working with a whole coalition of community advocates, including a lot of student advocates, that is a tax on larger businesses in professional services, including Amazon and Microsoft. So I've actually directly worked with people and tax Amazon and Microsoft, which are got a lot of wealth in this community, and we
30
dedicated it.
seconds.
And we dedicated that fund source for free college and university tuition, which is essentially transferring money, wealth from the wealthy to the folks who are low income so they can get an education and do better in life. And these are the kinds of things I support, and I'm ready to do the next level of funding in terms of progressive revenues for public priorities.
Thank you, Representative Frank Chop and Sheree Lascelles for answering our previous question. And our next one is, are you familiar with the solutions provided by King County Equity Now? And if so, please tell us how you would support implementing those solutions if you're elected into position. And we'll begin with Sheree Lascelles. Thank you.
May I ask for an accommodation? I would really appreciate it if we were able to do timing with a visual.
Oh, in regards to our timekeeper, you would like to see a visual time?
Yeah, it's
absolutely. Nico, are you able to provide visual timekeeping for this round, possibly?
Yeah. I'll have to transfer to my laptop though, so you might have to give me some time. Probably not this round, but next round though. Next question.
For this question, we'll let him gear up for that, and he'll have that ready for you for the next question. Until then, he'll just give you the 30 seconds. When he says 30 seconds, you have an additional 30 seconds. I recognize that both of you guys have been ending your statements around 30 seconds. Your statements are not done being timed in the 90 seconds until you hear the bell. So you actually have until the bell.
Okay, thank you. I didn't understand.
Absolutely. So Sheree, will you please answer that question, and we'll give the floor over to you.
I'm sorry to interrupt everybody. Can the moderators put up a hand sign to give Sheree the opportunity? Sheree needs the accommodation. If somebody could put up a hand sign as opposed, because it's the auditory interruption that's causing the problem.
Sure, for this round, we'll accommodate that. Sheree Lascelles, if you begin the question, answering the question, we'll tell you when you have 30 seconds left to answer the question.
We'll raise our hand.
Mm-hmm.
Did you guys see the chat?
So it looks like Sheree will need to withdraw from the forum. We will give Frank Chop the opportunity to answer that question. Latio, can you repeat the question for him, please?
Yes. The question is, are you familiar with the equity solutions of King County Equity Now? Please tell us how you support implementing those solutions.
Yes, I'm aware of quite a bit about those solutions. The biggest one that I think it can directly help with actually is in terms of the properties that are publicly owned that you've proposed to go to Black-led community organizations, including the Africatown Community Land Trust. I think it was a good start to have that fire station be transferred over, but there's other sites that you list on the King County Equity website that I believe I can help carry out. For example, the Kiro nursing home site in the central area. I know that Africatown has approached Sharon Lee of the Low Income Housing Institute to provide technical assistance to assist in that being transferred to community ownership. I started the Low Income Housing Institute many years ago with Sharon, and we have literally together working with the community coalition have built thousands of units of housing, but it's important to get maybe some technical help, but also get the ownership transferred into community land trusts. That is extremely important. There's other sites on MLK Way, for example, that are actually directly owned by the state that I can help you on. Another thing is we have to invest in anti-gentrification with specific public funding sources to fight that. I worked carefully with a coalition of transit advocates to make sure that Sound Transit, as a matter of law, has to transfer over their surplus or underutilized properties for community use, particularly for affordable housing. So there's a youth achievement center that's been proposed, opportunity center, that I can help actually transfer that land to the community ownership. So I'm very excited about this possibility. Please let us have an opportunity to talk later to follow up, because I have a lot of experience transferring public properties to community use. For example, the Pacific Tower building at the north end of Beacon Hill, I saved that from being developed, redeveloped.
30 seconds.
I saved that property from being redeveloped by a private for-profit developer who was going to sell it off for condos for rich people. I said, hell no, I'm going to stand for that. It's got to be in community use. So we have a community health college there that's been put in there. We have Fair Start, have a whole bunch of nonprofits like College Success Foundation and others. And on the north side of that property is being handed over to a SCIPTA, which is the Seattle Chinatown International District PDA, to develop 272 units of housing plus an early learning center run by El Centro de la Raza. Those are the things that I've already got done. I'm willing to partner with you to develop these other sites and help out the effort to transfer assets to Black-led community organizations like Africatown.
Thank you for answering that question. Our next question is, redirecting resources from anti-Black police system prisons that have been proven to be ineffective is an issue on the rise. Help us understand your position on how police funding can be repurposed for greater community and public safety outcomes.
You want me to answer? Okay, no problem. I totally support transferring money from the police department, which has got too much money, to put it into community-based nonprofits led by the people of color, including BIPOC organizations and others. And for example, there's some money that should be transferred from the police department of the city into social services, particularly mental health workers, to get other responses to people when they have a situation that shouldn't have a police officer showing up with a gun, for example. The money, it should also go to affordable housing. I put in 350 units of affordable housing at Sandpoint and Magnuson Park. That is a perfect example where we can use public funds to use public land, which used to be the federal government's Naval Air Station. We have 350 units of affordable housing units there, plus a community health clinic and an early learning center run by Denise Louis Child Development Center. That's an example that the funds that are going into the police department ought to be redirected to community uses like social services, mental health services, and affordable housing, particularly for homeless families. Out at Sandpoint, for example, there's 350 units, 200 of which are reserved for homeless families and individuals. And that one project alone transformed Northeast Seattle in terms of the demographics. It used to be where Northeast Seattle had covenants against
30 seconds.
Had covenants in their real estate documents against people of color actually owning or renting in that neighborhood. That's horrible. That ended legally several years ago, but the notion of transforming that community with literally 1,000 new residents there really not only help provide affordable housing for homeless families and other workforce folks, but also made a real statement about social justice, the way that things should be in the future. So we should transfer money from the police into these good community uses.
Thank you for answering that question. And Tammy.
Can you go to the question?
Yeah.
Okay, the next question is, the transfer of the state-controlled Seattle Vocational Institute, which is SVI, in the Central District to the community has been widely challenged as problematic and unethical. To name just one example, the community was supposed to elect trusted board members to serve on the CPDA to facilitate land transfer. However, current rep Sharon Tomiko Santos explicitly eliminated community decision-making and changed the process so the state legislators, that is, those who are not in the community or even close to it, would appoint CPDA board members. Despite being elected to represent the interests of the community in Seattle's historic Black district, Rep. Santos usurped Black community power. Unsurprisingly and appropriately, Black community members are incredibly disturbed by this. What will you do will you do a thorough investigation and take steps to restore the integrity of this process?
Well, as it turned out, because I got your questions ahead of time, I actually already started doing the investigation. I checked into the law that created the Public Development Authority. Plus, I checked a number of sources to explore this one issue about who can be on the board of the Public Development Authority, because the whole point of that is it's supposed to be community-based and it ought to represent the community, which means it ought to be elected by the community. So what I've been told by a number of people is that the initial board is appointed, but then they'll have an election, in the near future, supposedly. So I would be more than willing to work with you to make sure that they actually follow through on that commitment, to have the board of that Public Development Authority, in fact, elected by the local community. That process of how do you do the election, that I don't know what the details are, but clearly there ought to be an opportunity for a democratic process to elect community members to the Community Development Board. And that's an example. If you have other concerns about that process, I'd be more than happy to talk with you at a later date to figure out what other parts of things you need to have investigated. I was not directly involved in the transfer of that property to the Public Development Authority. They did their own process, shall we say. I don't know all the details of it, but if you'd like to chat some more about the specifics, I could probably do some more research and investigation to figure out what should be done. But clearly, the community ought to control that Public Development Authority through direct elections.
Thank you so much, Chop. Considering that our candidate that was part of your section of the forum did have to withdraw, we're going to give you an opportunity to do your closing statements, and we're going to move on to the next district.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited about working with King County Equity Now and Africatown, because when I saw the first website for King County Equity Now, I said, my God, this is perfect. You've got specific sites identified that you need to have transferred from a government, say, into community ownership. Well, I have a long history of actually doing those projects, ranging from not only the Sandpoint housing, but also Pacific Tower. And also years ago, I got 6 school buildings. The Seattle School District had said they're going to sell off 6 elementary schools. And I said, wait a minute, don't sell them off to some rich private developer, which will just add to the gentrification problem in our city. So I came up with a bunch of money, about $12 million to buy the 6 elementary schools, including one that's close to, actually is in the central area. So I have an experience of doing those kind of transfers, and I'm really eager to work with you and figure out the details of how we can specifically raise funds, public funds, as well as maybe some private funds, to do that transfer. And there's partners that could help in terms of providing technical assistance to the community, to King County Equity Now and Africatown, if that's appropriate. I was pleased to see that Africatown was able to work with Capitol Hill Housing, which is now called Community Roots Housing. That seemed to work out pretty good. It's on the websites and all that. So that's a good model, how we can work together to get assets transferred to Black-led community organizations to do community improvement projects and to prevent gentrification and really make the whole society much more just and fair.
Thank you for taking your time out of your day to be part of our forum today. We appreciate you. We'll be transitioning to the next part of our forum.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Take care.
You too. Next, we'll be moving on to District 37.
And we have Y. King Garrett, who will be setting the context for the 37th district. And then we'll move on to the candidate introductions. Y. King.
Good evening. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, you can be heard, Viking.
Excellent. Thank you. Yeah, good evening to everyone that's able to join. I would like, before going into that, I would like to see if it's possible for us to, in any way, offer an opportunity for Sheree Lascelles to come back at some point with and address the questions, so that we can, make sure that her voice is heard. I don't know if anyone can reach out to her, but that would be great if we could make that accommodation within the flow of the event. So speaking to the 37th district, we just heard from the 43rd district candidates, which is really the North Central district. And we have seen great displacement. I grew up on that side of Madison, and growing to Miller, and everyone that went to Meany and lives in the Valley, that's all the 43rd, the North Central district. The heart of the Central district is primarily in the 37th district. And then South Seattle Skyway begins to take on District 11, which are the next candidates that we will be hearing. We know how much policies and practices, as outlined by House Bill 1918, which passed last year and confirmed that the Black community has endured decades after decade of policies and practices from both the public and the private sector, which has disenfranchised the community and really paved the way for the Black community being completely pushed out of Seattle. And that is 37th district has been the hub of the Black community. And so the next race is very critical to the future of the Black community in Seattle and in Martin Luther King County. And really the 37th district has set the pace for human rights advocacy and the struggle for freedom, justice, and equality here in Seattle and Martin Luther King County. And so with that, we are glad to have the candidates for the 37th district, as well as the 11th district, joining to speak to very critical issues that will really help determine where Seattle goes. And does Seattle become a world-class city that's inclusive of the communities of the world, such as the Black community that's called the Central District in the 37th, home for almost 140 years? Or does it become a one-class city that is really what we've seen happen in the 43rd and pushing through into the 37th district, exclusive to white, wealthy individuals and high-wage earners primarily? And so this is the time and the policies that are set in place by our representatives and the way that they are able to convene outside of the elected officials, other stakeholders, private sector, philanthropy, et cetera, to pave the way forward is absolutely critical. So we're happy to have them today to share with the community what their approaches will be and what their policies will be to move us towards a new normal rooted in equity and away from the Jim Crow apartheid socioeconomic reality that we face right now in the 37th district in Martin Luther King Jr. County. Thank you.
Thank you, Y. King, for that context, and also to speak to inviting Sheree back. It looks like they will not be able to come back. So we're going to move forward with introductions. You want to remind our candidates of 37th what the introductions are?
Yes, so you will have 90 seconds to introduce yourself in the beginning, and with 30 seconds left, you will receive a bell from Finico saying that you have 30 seconds left. And right now we have combined the 37th and the 11th district candidates on the next set of questions.
Also, we want to give an opportunity for those of you that may need any amendments. We want to acknowledge you now. We know that Fanico is using his voice, giving you a 30-second warning and then a bell to wrap you up. If any of you guys need him to turn his camera on and use signs instead, please let us know in your introduction so we can accommodate you. So moving forward with introductions, you do have 90 seconds. You will be a 30-second warning. The first person we're going to allow to introduce themselves are John Stafford. Here.
Yes, unfortunately, John Stafford.
My back, no, but my real backpack.
Sorry.
Do we have, I'm sorry, do we have John Stafford, Legislative District 37, ready to introduce? If not, we will allow Chikundi Salisbury to introduce himself at this moment.
All right. Hey, you guys. Yeah, my name is Chikundi Salisbury, and I'm running to be your 37th District State Representative, position number 2. Of course, I'm running as a Democrat. A little bit about me. I'm married with 2 children. I live in Rainier Valley, where I've resided for the last 23 years as a homeowner. I grew up in the Central area, and I attended elementary, middle school, and high school here in Seattle, finishing at the greatest high school in the state, Garfield High School. I have a degree in computer science from Elizabeth City State University. It's an HBCU located in North Carolina. For my professional career, I've worked for the City of Seattle in the Parks and Recreation Department for the last 23 years, serving in several positions, and I'm currently the manager for the Environmental Sustainability Education and Engagement Unit. I will be working for you on economic empowerment through youth employment and job training, tax reform, and stopping the march of gentrification, allowing our elders to age in place, fully funded education, fighting homelessness with practical real-world solutions, protecting our green spaces and tree canopy as I have for the last 20 years. I've been a dedicated volunteer and servant here in the 37th District for years with organizations such as Southeast Youth and Family Services, Real Change, Mothers for Police Accountability, the YMCA, and more. I like to continue to be of service in Olympia as your representative. Thank you.
Thank you, Chikundi Salisbury, for your introduction. If, sorry, excuse 1 second. We would like Kirsten Harris-Talley to introduce themselves next. Thank you.
Hi all, I'm Kirsten Harris-Talley. Thank you so much to Africatown and King County Equity Now for hosting this forum this evening. And thank you to all the youth who organized all the questions. I'm a Black queer PTA mom who was asked by my neighbors to run. And I believe they asked me because of my 20 years of work in policy change and activism. I'm a proud abolitionist and have stood with Block the Bunker and No New Youth Jail. I'm proud to have marched in the streets this summer with our neighbors to make sure that we no longer invest in systems of incarceration when we have so much more and better things to invest in. I'm really proud of our community campaign. We're not taking corporate PAC dollars, we're not taking fossil fuel dollars, and we're not taking police union dollars because we're building something that is of, by, and for our neighbors here in the 37th. As King so eloquently outlined, this is a district with deep needs. We are a majority Black, Brown, Indigenous district. We're drawn as the most diverse district in Washington State, and I take that seriously. I truly believe if we can get it right for our neighbors here in the 37th, we can get it right for everyone in Washington State, which means we need a progressive revenue option where we invest directly into Black and Brown leadership in our communities. We need to listen to young people, and that's why our youth team is building a policy platform, and we're building an accountability council now so that we are beholden to our Black, Brown, and Indigenous leaders as we bring change to Olympia. I'm really excited for this conversation, and thank you all.
Thank you so much.
And we would like candidate David Hackney for District 11 to introduce themselves, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. My name is David Hackney, and I'm running for state representative, position 1 in the 11th district. I've been an attorney for approximately 25 years, but I think my lived experience will tell you more about the kind of legislator that I will be rather than my resume. I come from a proud union family. Both my grandfathers were union men. My grandfathers, one escaped the Jim Crow South, and the other survived the Great Depression because United Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and United Auto Workers were working for both their economic and civil rights. So I'm going to work to strengthen collective bargaining rights in the state of Washington and address income inequality. When I started high school, guidance counselors told my family that I was not college material. But with the love and support of my family and investments from my community, I was able to obtain degrees from Cornell University and Harvard University. So I'm going to work to get the educational needs, to meet the educational needs of every student in the 11th district to make sure that they fulfill their full potential. And while in high school, my best friend was shot to death by another teenager who should have never had access to a firearm. I believe gun violence is preventable, and I'm going to fight for responsible gun laws in Olympia. And finally, my senior year in college, my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer at a time my family did not have health insurance. The subsequent medical bills crippled my family financially. So I'm going to fight for health care for all. Here in South King County, we experience a lower average median income than the rest of King County. We've experienced 77% of all the gun violence in King County in 2019, and we're a majority renters district in a state where Black people are 5 times more likely to be evicted, and a Black woman is the most likely person to be evicted. I'm fighting to fight on all of these critical issues in Olympia if I have that opportunity. Thank you.
Thanks to all our candidates for introducing themselves. And for the first question, and the order we'll go in is the same order that you introduced yourself. Yeah, so the first question will be, education is the primary responsibility, and we have heard all of you speak about education. How and in what specific ways will you impact education which continues to fail Black students?
We'll start with Shakandi.
Oh, great. Hey, thanks for picking me first for once. You know, we all know that our schools have consistently failed Black students. You know, we've heard the flim-flam around serving those who are furthest away from educational justice. But at the end of the day, we as a society, and most certainly a district, continue to water the trees that are not on fire. We water the whole forest when we need to really water just our trees that are on fire and failing. You know, so I was very excited about ethnic studies last year, but, you know, we need to do more. And specifically, you know, when I get to Olympia, I want to work on special education funding. You know, I used to run the special education camp over at Camp Long, and so very familiar with the many needs. There's many children of color who are doubly damned, if you will, by the system by not being able to access funding for special education. Then I want to support the ART program and specifically retraining or training and access for our paraeducators and others on a pathway to become teachers. We need to actively recruit and retain teachers of color. We all know that our students do better, especially Black students do better when they have a teacher that looks like them. And then, of course, you know, on a big scheme, we all want to reduce. Okay, thank you, fam. Eliminate the school to prison pipeline so we and cater to our students' needs specifically. And obviously, I want to repeal I-200 so we can specifically go out and recruit more professors and teachers implicitly. Thank you.
Thank you, Shakandi. And our next candidate, sorry.
We're going to have Kirsten Harris Talley answer that question next. And Latia, can you repeat the question for them?
Yes, the question is, education is the primary responsibility. How and in what specific ways will you impact education which continues to fail Black students?
Thank you so much for asking this question. As I said in my introduction, I'm a proud Black queer PTA parent. I'm really proud to have both my children at Hawthorne Elementary, which is a majority Black administrative and teaching school within Seattle Public Schools. It is unfortunate that it is unique in that. And I want to continue to also see Black educators in our schools, which is why, unlike the other candidate, I am not accepting dollars from semi-private charter school PACs that are continuing to undermine collective teachers' rights and collective bargaining rights, and also creating these semi-private institutions that have lower representation of Black and Brown teachers than our standard public schools. At the state level, to start to really address the school to prison pipeline, we need to address our truancy policies and how they are targeting our Black and Brown students. We need to begin to address the gaps in education. We're fully underfunding education. Income tax states are paying $22,000 for students for education. We are still not fully funding here. And when we do, we're still only going to be spending $11,000 per student, which is egregious. We need to move away from an equality standard that gives the same amount of dollars per student and move to an equity standard that more deeply invests in our schools here in the 37th district, where we've been underinvesting in every bit of infrastructure, and move to models where we actually provide enough funding. And furthermore, we cannot talk about education and not talk about universal childcare when a child is young, as well as free college and what it is to make sure Black, Brown, Indigenous students are prioritized to that, because too often we've seen those programs start up and white students get the advantage, while still white supremacy and racism keeps our Black students from getting to actually use those systems and dollars. When we are at the state level, we have an ability to have accountability for the county and city level investments as well. And that's why I'm starting to work with coalitions in Skyway now, one of the only unincorporated parts of the district, to make sure that they don't have students continue to fall through the gaps, because that's now where the majority of Black families live, and we need to take that seriously.
Thank you, Kirsten Harris Talley. And now we'll have David Hackney answer the first question.
You're on mute, brother.
Thank you very much. I agree with all that was said before, but I think we need to have a different focus. We are in an economic crisis because of this pandemic. So I'm going to stand here and say, I will not cut education as part of an austerity budget because of our deficit. When you cut education, you actually just move the problem down the road. So we've got McCleary that is focusing on K through 12. You need to make sure that we protect pre-K so that students are prepared for education. And we need to make sure that we are also protecting university and community colleges. In addition, during this time of crisis, we need to expand the curriculum to make sure that we have pre-trade, so continuing technical education, CTE, as a curriculum in our public schools. Not every student is looking forward to a college degree. So we have dying infrastructure here. We have a lack of skilled tradespeople. Those are good jobs with good benefits. We need to also expand community workforce agreements, like the task force that I was on, to recommend a community workforce agreement for the Seattle Public Schools. That will require, give a preference to graduates of Seattle Public Schools, particularly minority students, for pre-apprenticeship and trades so that they can get prepared to take these skilled jobs. We recognize that during this pandemic, there's going to be a push to cut capital projects and to cut employment. We're going to have to stand strong. Rather than cut essential government programs, we need to look for new sources of revenue. But I also agree with the other elements that my colleagues have proposed. But I think in this time of economic crisis, you need to step forward and say, I will not cut these vital education resources, because we recognize that when you don't make smart investments, it costs more money down the road. A recent University of Washington study indicated, I'll just finish this. University of Washington indicated that for every $6 you spend for every $1 you spend for foster education from 18 to 21, you save $6, and that's a smart investment.
Okay. At this moment, we do have John Stafford. We're going to give you an opportunity to take 90 seconds to introduce yourself. We have our timekeeper, Fanico. He will be letting you know when you have 30 seconds, and then you will hear a bell when your 90 seconds is complete. At the end of your 90 seconds of introduction, we will repeat this question one more time so you have an opportunity to answer it as well. So I'm giving the floor now over to John to introduce himself.
All right, good evening. It's nice to be here, and I appreciate you, the organization, setting up this forum. It makes a strong contribution to the community. I'll start with my platform. There are 4 components to it. By the way, I'm a candidate for state representative in the 37th Legislative District, position 1. So the 4 prongs of my platform are, first, we must avoid an austerity approach to the upcoming budget negotiations in Olympia. We cannot afford to cut social programs for the poor. Second, we need a new progressive source of taxation in Washington State. We have the most regressive tax structure in the country. I support specifically a capital gains tax. Third, climate change is a imminent existential crisis that must be addressed aggressively. We need to institute programs such as declaring a climate change emergency in Washington State, banning the sale of new internal combustion engine vehicles by 2030, and a mandatory K-12 education program dealing with climate change curriculum. Fourth, we must deal with the demands for racial justice by getting at the underlying societal inequities that gives rise to them in the first
30 seconds.
All right, I'm highly involved in the community. I'm a 20-year resident of the 37th Legislative District. I'm a high school teacher. I'm on the executive board for the 37th District Democrats. I'm a PCO. I'm involved with 3 climate change organizations, and I'm the author of 40 articles on public policy for the South Seattle Emerald. You can learn more about me at staffordforstaterepresentative.org. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And we'll give you an opportunity to answer the question you want to ask.
Yes, the question is, education is the primary responsibility. How and in what specific ways will you impact education which continues to fail Black students?
All right, thank you. A very important question, obviously, and I'll answer it with sort of 3 prongs. The first, as I suggested in my opening comments, we need to get at the underlying societal inequalities in the education system, not just deal with the symptoms. So for example, in Seattle Public Schools, and by the way, I worked 15 years as a full-time substitute teacher in Seattle schools. I've worked in every single one of them. We have the 5th largest achievement gap in the country, which is very unfortunate. And we have a situation where 83% of Black 8th graders are on free and reduced price lunches versus 9% for white students. Equally concerningly, the populations, of course, are skewed towards the students on free and reduced lunch in the south side and the ones that aren't in the north side of the city. So we have this geographic socioeconomic divide that's very concerning, and it perpetuates itself every year. So to address this, I support what I'm calling community investment schools, where once a school has a high enough percentage of students on free and reduced lunch prices, they get higher per pupil funding than the other schools in the same district to compensate that. And it's a way for society to say, we're not going to stand for these perpetuating inequities year after year. Second prong, we need changes in our schools, relevant curriculum, advanced placement and or international baccalaureate programs in all schools, and encouraging every student to take classes in that area, as was done in Rainier Beach High School, which is a confidence builder. We also need more counseling to help people with their career planning. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to be moving on to our next question.
And the next question is, do you support reparations for the Black community, specifically that has called the 43rd?
No, I'm sorry. We apologize. That was for the last district.
1 second.
Okay, we apologize. Starting the question over.
Yes. Do you support reparations for the Black community specifically that has called the that's called this district home for nearly 140 years and endured policies that has systemically disenfranchised our community socioeconomically? We'll start with Shikundi once more.
Yeah, well, most certainly I will support those policies. As White King most eloquently talked about in his opening, the policies and practices laid out in House Bill 1918 really illustrate the fact that, everybody was working against us. And so we need the system to work for us in a real way to be able to get back to where we need to be. These problems have created a huge racial disparities. And what I would like to see, and what I said all summer at every rally is, pay the fee. I want to see us in a real way, pay the fee. And then what does that mean? I think that one of those things is, I love the idea about the $1 billion anti-gentrification fund. I most certainly would support that. And I'd look to have more intentional investment in our Black and Brown communities, our business communities as well. So there's really been a huge focus around, housing, obviously, because that's the emergency as we are continuing to be gentrified. But I'd really like to see more resources put into small businesses and education for adults who are trying to move forward and move out of the, the cycle of our economic situation right now. So yes, most certainly, I do support reparations. However, I'd really like to see exactly what does that look like. Is that is that a check or is that the fund? But on a larger scale, I most certainly support it.
Thank you, Shakandi. And we'll move on to the next candidate. Kirsten, please answer the question. Thank you.
I do believe in reparations, and there's many solutions ready to go at the state level that we need to do to start implementing that. We've passed the Working Families Tax Credit on the state level, but we have not had the revenue to invest in that. And that puts cash money directly in families' pockets. Right now, the proposal at the state level is $300 per family. We need to increase that to $1,200 per family and talk about more than a once a year allotment. We need to do priority for small businesses. And quite frankly, I disagree with Mr. Chop. There are a lot of tools actually still in policy, despite that preemption, for us to do direct investment into small businesses, including acquisition of land, handing that land out of public domain into community domain. It shifts the whole balance of what it is to build community projects. And we can do that very quickly and expedite those kind of priorities. We can also do deep investments into community models that disperse dollars. And there's a number of ways to do that from the state level. I also have to say, we cannot talk about reparations and not talk about the fact that the cannabis dollars at the state level that was supposed to go into community models has been moved into the general fund. Those dollars need to move back into a dedicated fund, which is another way, and then we can fast track those dollars into community hands. I also want to see a priority beyond putting dollars directly into people's pockets of what it is to actually bolster policy that will make sure we reverse the legacy of redlining and other policies, which are the qualities that have moved folks out of the district. We need right to return policies and other things that bolster and keep folks who built these communities rooted here. And I've already done a lot of this work at the state level in policy and writing policy, and I'm already building an accountability council to make sure that we do this together with community.
Thank you. Kirsten, you want to repeat the question, Latia, before we go into the next person?
Yes, the question is, do you support reparations for the Black community specifically that has called this district home for nearly 140 years and endured policies that have systemically disenfranchised our community socioeconomically?
And we'll have John Stafford answer that question next.
All right, thank you. So I do think it's very important to segment the issue of reparations. So for example, there's reparations from the US government to Africa. I support that. There's corporate reparations requiring corporations to make amends for profiteering off the slave trade, etc. I support that. And then comes the topic, which is what's most commonly referred to, of course, is the government reparations to citizens. And here, in turn, it's useful to split it into two different prongs. One is hard reparations, with cash payments to Black citizens of the United States to compensate them for the ongoing effects of slavery. I actually don't support hard reparations. I think it's going to be very difficult to administer, and more importantly, I don't think it'll be proved that effective at leading to the types of changes that need to be made. Instead, I support soft reparations, which are disproportionate levels of investment into Black communities to help them make up for the fact that there's been such a long legacy of discrimination. So for example, I support the community investment schools that I talked about before, where schools, lower income minority schools receive higher per pupil funding levels than more affluent schools. I support subsidized daycare, 2 years of free college, community college, before and after school programs, et cetera. So, you know, the focus in my view needs to be on addressing the institutional inequities that, if not addressed, will continue to generate very troubling inequalities in outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and repeat the question one last time before we give it over to David Hackney.
Do you support reparations for the Black community specifically that has called the district home for 140 years and endured policies that has systemically disenfranchised our community socioeconomically?
I do. And I disagree with the previous speaker. I definitely believe in both direct wealth transfers and investments in the community. I think it's important to take a step back and understand how systemic racism coming from slavery has impacted our community even today. So even after World War II, when white soldiers came back, they received a tremendous benefit with the GI Bill for loans for housing. Black communities were left out of that program because Black neighborhoods were redlined. That became a huge vehicle for intergenerational wealth, and is the reason now that the wealth of Black families is a mere fraction of that of white families. So we're going to have to think about another financial instrument like the 30-year mortgage that was designed specifically to allow returning soldiers to purchase land with low down payments and low interest rates. We can do that again, and we can focus on you know, Black and brown communities.
30 seconds.
We can focus on the mass incarceration and how it has impacted Black communities from slavery, from the slave patrols to today. We can reform laws, low, you know, nonviolent drug crimes, nonviolent crimes. We can release those folks today. We can have reentry programs for them to allow them to get housing and jobs. We can also work on equal access to healthcare. I Can't Breathe was not something that was just with George Floyd. It's because of environmental racism that has gone on since the days of slavery.
Thank you for answering that. I'm going to move on to our next question. The next question is, do you support building Africatown? And if so, how will you move this initiative forward if elected? The part 2 to that question is, please tell us how you support the demands of King County Equity Now in those initiatives. We'll have John Stafford answer that question first. You're on mute. You can start from the top.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I do support Africatown. I think it's an inspiring endeavor. I also support the efforts of King County Equity Now. These are sort of vast endeavors, so it's sort of hard to distill my support into a couple different things. But what I will say is, with respect to sort of working in tandem with these organizations, there's much that can be done to support the underlying economic performance of lower income communities that will sort of undergird the efforts of both Africatown and King County Equity Now. So these include things like ongoing increases to the minimum wage, pursuing a universal single payer healthcare model, accelerating the transition from central to decentralized mental health care, affirmative action. I support I-1776. Increased state involvement in affordable housing, possibly rent control, et cetera. Okay, so there's a lot of things that can be done to support the underlying economic situation in the Central District and other lower income minority communities. And then finally, I support a variety of the specific endeavors of these initiatives, community land banks to help combat gentrification, the repurposing of decommissioned Fire Station 6, et cetera. A lot of these initiatives are very inspiring, and I would seek to support those as well. Thank you.
Thank you. We will ask the question again. Should we go back to the question, Mateo? The question is, do you support building Africatown? And if so, how will you move this initiative forward if elected? The part 2 to that question is, tell us how you support the demands of King County Equity Now through these initiatives. We're gonna give the floor over to Shikundi.
All right, thank you. Well, yeah, first of all, I've supported that building Africatown from day one. I've been there. I was there at every turn, when we tore down the mid-down, when we painted the parking lot. I DJ'd the event for the Liberty Bank building. I was there when we turned the dirt on that parking lot. I was there the day that we cut the ribbon, right? And I continue to be there as a volunteer and community member many years before this February when I decided to run. I've been a present and accounted for community member supporting Africatown. And so, and then of course, I'm proud to be endorsed by Andrea Capane, who's on the board, and former Representative Don Mason, who's well involved with Africatown. Specifically, how I will support King County Equity Now's goals. As you may or may not know, I've been also fighting against predatory development. And this would be the continuation and bolstering of my "This Home Is Not for Sale" sign campaign that I will be working with with realtors. And then also, obviously reallocating and defunding the police is in Seattle is obviously a city level issue. However, I am interested at a state level in defunding our incarceration system and use that money to create economic opportunity in our specific community and around our specific buildings at Africatown. That includes microloans for our businesses and enough money so people can be successful. Currently, we give enough money for people to fail. Thank you.
Thank you, Shikundi, for answering the question. And I'll repeat the question once more so that Kirsten Hairstyle can answer the question. Do you support building Africatown? And if so, how will you move this initiative forward if elected? And the second part is, please tell us how you'd support the demands of King County Equity Now.
Absolutely. I support Africatown. I am ecstatic about the vision and material manifestation of that vision that Africatown has stewarded. I'm ecstatic that they've used a community land trust model. I want to see expansion of that at the state level. And again, I want to see direct community investment into these models. Furthermore, I want us to move more of the cannabis dollars directly into realizing this vision as well, and meet the demands that are extended through their collaboration with so many others under King County Equity Now. There are many demands that at the state level we can influence and take action on. The piece around paying the fee and what it is to move dollars out of policing into community, we also need to do at the state level. While those demands have been made at the city level, the potential out of a $2.4 billion budget, which is what our current Department of Corrections budget at the state level, for what deep investment into this community, where quite frankly, too many of our neighbors are wrapped up in that system, is a game changer. Furthermore, the state is still involved with the SBI project, and moving that into the RFP process that should have been the original process that they worked in collaboration with the city and county to have. It should be priority number one so that community models and voice can be in that. The research that's already being done by King County Equity Now should be the very questions and research we're using for all the basis of funding. And I want to expand that $1 billion number at the state level so we can make sure all Black communities throughout the state have the dollars that they need for prioritization. And a state bank for direct investment into these models, where you don't have to go to Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and others who quite frankly have invested against our communities and our planet, should be a priority as well.
Thank you, Kirsten Hairstyle, for answering the question. And candidate David Hackney, if you would answer the question next. Thank you.
Yes, I support Africatown. I agree with Kirsten Harris-Talley. I think this is a perfect opportunity for a state bank. One, we won't have to pay banking fees, which come into actually hundreds of millions of dollars that we can use to invest in our communities. Second, we can direct the investment into the kind of programs and projects in minority communities that will actually bring wealth. We heard before about using our leverage to collective power to move toward equity. I think also with respect to the Equity Now, we need to accept the proposals from Black community organizations to maximize use of public land, of many examples that have been given today, including not just in the 37th, we also need to move into the 11th in South King County, which is where many of the people that have been moved out because of gentrification are now landing. So we need to make sure that that community is also protected. We also need to halt not only predatory development, but also foreclosures. There needs to be, for that community in particular, we need to stop all foreclosures for property taxes. We need to have a moratorium and also some sort of debt relief, because when the moratorium ends, people will not be able to afford it. We need to make sure that new development requires them to invest in low-income housing and in the community. We need to make sure that before there's new development, that the community is advised and is able to negotiate benefits for the community before private development happens. And I also agree that we do need to have a anti-gentrification land acquisition fund, again, through the state bank to accomplish some of these objectives.
Thank you all for answering that question. And our next question is, how do you plan to direct resources towards effective intervention strategies against gun violence?
And we'll start with Kirsten.
By many measures, when compared relatively to the rest of the country, Washington likes to brag that we have some of the most progressive gun policy in the country. And quite frankly, when you look through the lens of income inequity and race, that is just dead wrong. Right now, we have too many guns on the streets. And that is not only in our communities, but quite frankly, in Washington state, we have a growing white supremacist movement that is also stockpiling guns, and the state has made not a peep about it. And what we saw in our own city when there were protests, righteous protests by Black folks, and what that looked like for those folks to come into our communities is a public health risk that the state needs to address. We need to start a registry around guns and also make sure that those guns that are in circulation and that we know got there from outside of the state, that we have a buyback program and other programs to get those guns off the street, but make sure folks have the resources they need to invest in the upstream solutions that our communities need. Too many of our young people in the 37th are dying from gun violence, and it's because we are not investing in what they need. And the other piece is that we need to make sure that we're addressing what it is to have automatic weapons and other pieces at the state policy level. And quite frankly, I'm really concerned about the lack of movement around domestic violence. Right now, while folks are in a pandemic, we know a gun in the home means that for too many women and children, they are probably seeing great violence and potential death, and there needs to be action taken immediately. I'm a mother, and one of the most sobering days was when my 6-year-old came home for our open carry policies because her school had an emergency lockdown. And to talk to your first grader about what it is for a mean man to come in your school and what you're going to have to do, we need to start taking action now. And at the state level, quite frankly, the Democrats have not held the line on this because they're more worried about white voters in the middle of the state than people's substantive lives. Police violence is gun violence, and we need to start talking about that at the state level as well.
Wow. Okay. Latiel, repeat the question. After Latiel repeats this question, we'll have Shikundi respond.
The question is, how do you plan to direct resources toward effective intervention strategies against gun violence?
You're muted.
You know, first of all, I've seen many of my friends and family, murdered directly. I've had a lot of direct impact here in the district and beyond to gun violence. So it is very important to me. What I plan to do is really invest in solutions upstream many of the programs in the community. I actually founded a program called 100 Black Parents, where I've been building and giving families the resources to connect outside of the city to be able to make real connections and build family. And we just need to invest in many more programs in our community so folks don't get to the point where they feel like they need to pick up a gun. When Connor was killed, his mother said, the boy that killed her son just needed a hug. And I really believe in that. That's why I've been working on these initiatives for years before I ever considered to running for office, if you will. So, but specifically in Olympia, one of the things that I like to do is work on gun tracing. We know that, the guns that are killing, my friends and family's children, like up on AM, PM, those guns aren't coming. They weren't bought here in this district. We need to get to the bottom of how these guns are coming to our community and hold those people accountable. And we need to work with legal gun owners to do that. They want to see accountability as well, because they know that the legal guns that they enjoy in sport fishing or whatever, sport hunting, are not the guns that are coming into our community and using to murder our kids. So yeah, most certainly I'm very committed to working to reduce gun violence in our community, and I'll continue that work at the state level.
Okay, we are going to give the opportunity for David Hackney to answer the question in regards to gun.
Thank you. I currently serve on the board of the Alliance for Gun Responsibility and have actively worked on I-1639, which was to raise the age of purchasing a handgun to the same age as purchasing a long gun, and also safe storage. We know that we need to reduce the number of guns on the street. Guns do not make communities safer, they make them more dangerous. We need to address legislation that failed in the legislature last session to regulate high capacity magazines. And we need to continue to improve the legislation on emergency risk protection orders, which allows the police to confiscate guns from people that perpetrate domestic violence and show that they are a danger to the community by how they, everything from acts of violence and to misuse of guns. We also have to understand that we must work to defund the police, because from a performance audit, we recognize that mass incarceration and violence has not stopped crime. In order to stop crime, we need to start investing in community organizations, like choose different ways to resolve conflict and how to better themselves. We also, right. So we also need to focus on, again, in the nationwide, on making sure that there are better gun laws so that guns coming from out of state, cannot murder and injure the community here. So Washington State is a leader, but we can do a whole lot better to reduce gun violence. As a gun violence survivor, I know gun violence is preventable. Thanks.
Thank you. We are going to allow John Stafford to answer next.
All right, thank you very much. So the first thing I'll say is similar to what I've said earlier, we do need to get to the underlying inequities that exist in our society and address those in order to create an environment that is less conducive to violence. One of the things we haven't spent much time talking about is tax structure in the state. Our lowest 20% income residents pay almost 18% of their income on state and local taxes, whereas our richest 1% pay 3%. That's exactly backwards. That contributes to income inequalities, which contributes to an antagonistic environment, which plays some role in contributing to gun violence. So that needs to be addressed. I've talked about affirmative action. We've talked about affordable housing investments. So we need to get at the underlying inequities in society. Similarly, our K-12 schools, which we've talked about previously, much needs to be done there to improve the general environment and the outlook in terms of opportunities for lower income minority students to again start to level the playing field so so there's less of an antagonistic environment that can contribute to an environment with gun violence. Third, police restructuring is important. We can't have the transfer of federal military equipment to local police departments. We need to ban things like chokeholds, which are an expression of violence that can in turn, contribute to a more violent atmosphere, et cetera. Police decertification needs to be more readily available as an option. That's something that's being worked out at the state now that I support. So all of these things need to be done. And then in addition to that, specific gun rights, gun control legislation needs to be affected. And here I support the full range of common sense gun control. So I agree with the speaker that talked about the need to legislate against high capacity magazines, make all semi-automatic weapons illegal and assault rifles. We need gun buyback programs, et cetera. So it needs to be multi-pronged and multi-leveled to deal with the overall problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
And sorry.
We'll start with our next question.
And our next question is, how are each of you different from your opponents? And how are each of you different from your opponents?
So we'll start with Kirsten.
Thank you all so much for this question. I want to state first that I'm so proud to be running in the 37th right now. This is the only race I can find in Washington state history where both the top two candidates are Black, and that really matters in this moment, and it matters for this district. There's a lot of contrast between us as candidates. From day one, I built this campaign the way I've built my activism for the last 20 years, and that's in community, in collectiveness, with activists and organizers on the ground. Our district is the most diverse in Washington state, and quite frankly, we're one of the most civically engaged and active districts in the state as well. And so that means from go, we've been living our values. I'm not accepting corporate PAC dollars in contrast to the other candidate. I'm not accepting fossil fuel dollars, and I'm not accepting police union dollars, because I believe the way we raise our money shows who we're accountable to. I am not going to support semi-private charter schools and the investments in my other campaign, and quite frankly, pretty underinvesting in our education. I have over 20 years experience passing policy and writing policy at the state level that helps Black people. I helped write an anti-shackling policy that gets to the heart of why incarceration system is still linked to slavery, because too many Black women were shackled while they were giving birth in prisons. I've worked on Initiative 940 to de-escalate Washington that we can fully invest in. And I just know that we need to hit the ground running, know the game, and play it well and with integrity. That's how I lead. That's how I show up. And I'm proud to stand with my community in this moment.
Thank you for answering the question. And we'll go to Shikundi to answer the question again. How are you different from your opponent?
Well, first of all, I'm from here. I graduated from high school here in Seattle, Washington, and I have much deeper roots just by default of that fact than Kirsten. And I would say that we have a completely different background. I, of course, have public service in terms of working for the city of Seattle. I've been a union member where I've actually had to work and talk and support my fellow workers through, talking to my shop steward and being able to work through that. And I've paid union dues. So when I talk about supporting good union jobs, it's because I have one. And, I'm a small business owner. I've owned C-Spot Media Group for years now. And yeah, it's true. I did take some money from a PAC, but that PAC is our small businesses. The Washington Beverage Association that I accepted a donation from includes the Island Soul and, many of our, Jerk Shack. These are our Black businesses that pay money into that fund. And so, I guess I find that a little disingenuous to say, I'm accepting corporate donations from our small businesses in our neighborhood. And that's why they support me. And that's why they asked their organization to donate to my fund. And then lastly, I would just say that, my campaign I don't have rich friends. I know that, the people that donate to my campaign are really workers. I'd say my opponent has, over 30 max donors, and those are just rich people that want to affect our campaign. So we have, you know, low people, and that's our campaign. Those are the differences.
Thank you so much. You want to ask the question?
Yeah, so for our next candidate, John Stafford, if you answer the question, how are you different from your candidates, from the other opponents, sorry.
Yeah, all right. So I'm running against Sharon Kamiko Santos, and I'll just highlight 4 differences that I think are important in this race. The first is climate change. Of the 20 most critical bills introduced in Olympia in the last 2 years in the state legislature, my opponent sponsored 17% of the bills that she was able to sponsor. And I, you know, in doing research, I'm aware that there are people in Olympia that are climate champions. These include people like Representative Joe Fitzgibbons, Senator Joe Nguyen, Representative Nicole Macri, our state Senator Rebecca Saldana from the 37th Legislative District. All these individuals sponsored legislation at a rate of between almost 2/3 to 90%. And so in my opinion, sponsoring legislation at a rate of 17% is irresponsible given how significant this crisis is. Second, tax reform. Certainly it's the case that my opponent considers herself to be in favor of progressive taxation. The issue is she's been in office for 22 years and there hasn't been any significant change. And I think that's a major problem. The third is she supported a relaxation of payday lending standards in our district and statewide in 2015, which I am 100% opposed to. And finally, on the issue of government transparency in 2018, she supported a partial repeal of the Public Records Act, which I also strongly oppose to because I think government transparency is a critical objective. Thank you.
Thank you, John Stafford, for answering the question. And we'll ask David Hackney, how are you different from the opponent that you're running against? Thank you.
Thank you. So I'm running against Zach Hudgens, who's an 18-year Democratic incumbent. And frankly, we have some very stark differences, particularly on critical issues in the 11th LD. The 11th Legislative District is the majority renters district. Yet my opponent was one of 4 Democrats to join the Republican caucus and vote against just cause evictions and establishing protections for renters. Even though, as I've said before, African Americans are 5 times more likely to be evicted than whites. And the most Latinos are 2 times more likely to be evicted than whites. And the most commonly evicted person is an African American woman. So in the majority renters district, that's out of touch. With respect to other issues, I have been an activist on I-1000 to repeal I-200. This is in a district that has a lower average median income. My opponent did nothing to organize the district, and our 88 lost by less than 0.5%. And unlike the 37th, we have some of the lowest voting turnout because no one was organizing this district on critical issues. So with respect to being an activist in the community, my opponent has been an empty suit and has been phoning it in for the last 18 years, which is the exact reason that I chose to address it. I chose to run because a seat in the legislature is a terrible thing to waste. We need someone who's going to fight on critical issues that impact this district. In a district where, you know, we in South King County, where we experience 77% of all the gun violence, again, my opponent was nowhere to be found on I-1639, where I was out getting signatures, where I was testifying in the legislature. He was nowhere to be found in the implementation of I-940. He was nowhere to be found in the regulation of high-capacity magazines. I'm not sure what he's focusing on, but it's not been on the critical issues of this district. And if you want someone that's going to fight for issues that are important to the people of this district, then David Hackney is your representative. Thank you.
Thank you. At this time, we're giving the candidates, if your opponent is present on the forum, an opportunity to ask your opponent one question. And so because we do have Shikundi and Kirsten, I'm going to give the opportunity to Shikundi to ask the question to your opponent first, and then we'll give them an opportunity to answer.
Yeah, so I guess I would say to Kirsten, because it seems like she has a real problem with business. A lot of local businesses like Island Soul and Jerk Shack. These are Black-owned businesses that ask their association to donate to my campaign. And so I'm just wondering, what is the issue when Black-owned businesses who've been underrepresented in their association for years finally get excited about using that resource to support a candidate that they know and love? What is the issue with that? Or why don't you want them to do that?
I think that's a great question about where the dollars are coming from. And I want to be clear, I am ecstatic that that business association is supporting one of the 2 Black candidates in this race. That's important. I'm speaking directly to your investment from Lilly Pharmaceutical, which has stood in opposition to expansion of healthcare now. I'm talking about your accepting donations from Blue Cross Blue Shield, who did the same. And I'm also talking about the fact that Stand for Children, that's looking at apartheid education, you've been more than happy to take their dollars as well. It matters how we do this work. It matters to show up with integrity. Because let me be clear, 2021 will not allow a gasp. We're going to go in and have to stand in the line on no austerity, which is why I've already signed that pledge. And that's also why I've already signed the solidarity pledge from King County Equity Now about the city level and county level reforms they want to see, because on the state level, I plan to show up too. It is not genuine to say that all you've accepted are small business donations when you have actually accepted from corporations who have pushed our communities, Black, brown, and Indigenous people in this district behind for literally years. I've been in those deliberations. I've been sitting in the room of testimony when they show up, and those lobbyists have had too much influence. And the fact that you would accept their dollars means something. I was prepared to run against the incumbent for this district for the same reason. And I'm going to always speak truth when it needs to be said.
Thank you to both of the candidates. And
is there a rebuttal to that or no?
We will give you 90 seconds to rebuttal.
Yeah, I would just say that, yes, I did, in fact, accept a donation from Eli Lilly. Nate Miles, who is an icon in our community, also my frat brother, a member of the Royal Esquire Club, and a board of the National NAACP, who has made sure that Black candidates have been supported for years. And when he called me and said, hey, I want to make sure you get a donation to your campaign, as Nate Miles, the board of the Urban League here, and a person who, I've looked up for years, said this was okay, I most certainly did that. And then with the other one, Primera, it's Black employees that work there. The Black employees told them, hey, you need to donate to our candidate. So yeah, when Black employees work at a place and they say, hey, we want you to support our candidate. Finally, we got somebody that we trust and want to go to Olympia on our behalf, invest in that candidate. And we most certainly did take that, again, because our campaign is not as well funded as Kirsten's. There you go. Thanks.
Thank you guys so much. We're going to give an opportunity for Kirsten to now ask the question to Shikendi, and there will be an opportunity for rebuttal. Thank you.
I've really appreciated what you've shared about being someone who was born and raised here. While I was not born here, my activism and history of what it is to represent this district was, and I've shown up for 2 decades in that work. Knowing what it's going to look like to have to hit the ground running when we hit the legislature, I'd like to know what your plan is for accountability and what policies you'll prioritize, and how you're going to show up around no austerity and the policies that we're going to need to steward from day one.
Thank you, Shikendi. Please respond to the question.
Well, yeah, I'm going to show up like I've showed up for this community my entire life. As I talked earlier, my receipts are on my website. All of the things that I talk about in my campaign, I most certainly have done with my hands. I've worked, and they're, like I say, so I want people to go on my website, check out my receipts from the last 30 years. Shikendi.com. But specifically to the question, I want to hit the ground running. I've talked about several things that I want to have on day one, including no-knock warrants. I'd like to have police accountability legislation, and I'm prepared to hold the line around no austerity for our social programs, schools, and education, and most certainly youth development and apprenticeships. And as on other calls, I want to fund that through defunding our prison complex. So yeah, there you go. That's how I'm going to hit the ground running in Olympia, and I'm going to fight austerity.
Thank you. At this moment, I would like to offer an opportunity for rebuttal if there is one from Kirsten. If not, we'll move on to the next question.
Thank you so much for letting me respond. I appreciate all the ways you've showed up in community the last 30 years, and I appreciate the legacy of your family and activism. I know we share so many common values. What I know is how the legislature works. That's why I'm already reaching out to legislators about what priorities will be in caucus. That's why I'm already building an accountability council with neighbors like King County Equity Now, Creative Justice, and others, so that we have a policy priority day one. It's why I'm already interviewing Black women and other folks in district to make sure the staffer I have, which let me be clear, there are currently 0 Black staffers in the House, that we make sure we have someone with voice here who stood beside me in activism and the work. It makes a difference to know the playbook, the system, and to know how to come into that system and make sure you're standing right beside community to do it. And I'm so proud of what we've built with community so far. Our youth team policy priority and the way we're organizing is how we will continue to show up, because what we need to do is flip the script. No one needs to go to Olympia and sit in that black box and not come back here and carry the water of the district. And so I hope folks will join us at electkht.org and join us in what it is to build the container starting today of what good governance is going to look like on the other side of November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I don't believe we have any other opponents on the call with the other candidates that are present.
But we have one question specifically for David Hackney. As a previous prosecutor, how will you reconcile being an agent of violence in a system that was built to brutalize Black people?
Oh, thank you for that question. So a prosecutor is definitely a position of power, and it's not just, it's how you use the power. I used the power to do the best I could to bring justice. When 25 years ago, when I joined the Department of Justice, I thought it was important that people of color and progressives were part of the system. At that time, we were just making the transition from indeterminate sentencing to mandatory sentencing, which gave the power to the prosecutors. So I used that power to bring justice to my community. I prosecuted a civil rights case where an African-American family was firebombed in a white community in Virginia that didn't like them being there. I used my power as a prosecutor at the United Nations to prosecute war crimes trial, including a Bosnian Serb detention camp commander who raped and tortured and murdered hundreds of his neighbors. I used my power as a prosecutor to do criminal justice reform in Kosovo and Uzbekistan. And I do recognize that the system is flawed. Mass incarceration and violence, again, did not solve crime problems. But I did what I could in the cases that I had to do justice. You can stand outside the courtroom and the court building and you can yell for justice, or you can get in the game and be the actual person that makes decisions on real cases of what happens to people. I decided to get in the game, and I'm proud of the work that I did.
Thank you.
Thank you for responding for that question. And we have one more question in regards to your district. Skyway, as a predominantly Black neighborhood, has been underinvested in, resulting in food deserts and transportation inequity. How will you address this if elected? And that's for you, once again, for David Hackney.
Sure. So again, thank you for that question. So let's take them one at a time. So a food desert happens when there is no fresh food available to people in the community. And that happens because of a lack of investment in that community. And so there are the big chains don't have grocery stores there, and the smaller food suppliers actually don't have the refrigerated space to have fresh vegetables. And that is a humongous problem for the health and nutrition of that community. So what needs to happen is you need to get fresh vegetables and fruits in that community. One, you can Black farming and community gardens. You can do that. I have a certificate from George Washington University in Washington, D.C. in urban farming. So that is certainly one thing that I would promote on the state level with grants and other examples. Secondly, I would give incentives to the major chains to bring stores into those communities. So again, getting fresh fruit and vegetables there. With respect to transportation, again, our communities have been ignored by both ST3 with the expansion of light rail and also with busing and transportation dollars. So we recognize that cars are the biggest contribution to greenhouse gases and carbon, and also to air pollution, which causes respiratory diseases in much higher proportions in African Americans. So we need to get people out of cars, and we need to increase resources, both buses and other mass transportation resources. And we need to have low-income housing that is built near these transportation hubs. And the communities that have been ignored and redlined, like many in the 11th district, we have to address that immediately. We have to have a racial, social justice lens when we are evaluating transportation bills to make sure if they are not serving communities of color and low-income communities, we must, as a caucus, we're going to have the largest caucus of African Americans in the history of the state. We must get together to focus on issues like transportation.
Thank you for answering those questions specifically aimed at you and Tammy.
Okay, we want to thank all the candidates in this section, the 37th and the 11th district, for joining us. We're going into closing statements. Your closing statements are